fiction has been moved to current affairs.
Hello, and welcome to Dystopian Fiction Has Been Moved to Current Affairs. Very excitingly, this is our 30th episode, and
Whoop,
we're going to
whoop.
be discussing Severance. We're
Yay!
not going to
Whoa.
provide you with any answers as to what this show is actually about. Lots of
Yeah, no.
spoilers, but no explanations at all. Yeah, but what an amazing show. I think we've both
Yeah,
really loved it.
incredible.
But yeah, definitely quite out there. So I'm handing over to Masha to do the job of explaining the premise of this. Not worth trying to explain everything that
Yes.
happens in the plot because really you need to
No.
watch it. There's a
No.
lot.
Go watch it. Don't listen to
Um,
this until you've gone to go watch
yeah,
the series because it
yeah.
is you cannot miss out on it. But yeah, okay. I feel like I've got the hard job right.
You have, yes, yeah.
Um, So the premise of Severance is asking the question of what happens when you can undergo this medical procedure where you separate your work memories from your personal life memories. And it kind of, at first sounds really great. Just the idea that you can walk into an elevator or up a staircase every day and get paid to just like walk out of it at 5 p.m. Walk in at 9, walk out at 5. But on the other side of that, it kind of quickly unravels that there's all sorts of ethical dilemmas and questions and slavery kind of going on.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, this show's definitely is quite mind boggling. And as you just watch all of this unravel, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, other than it just being completely mind-boggling, the show is also visually, sound design and soundtrack,
Mm.
like soundtrack as well, just all the colors and yeah, even just general like fonts and design like that as well.
Mm.
It's just incredible. Ben Stiller has really like you know just smashed it. I think everyone's quite shocked because who knew a show about sat in a windowless office
Yeah.
for basically the whole runtime
Mm.
could be so, I don't know, just so eye catching and so
Mm.
well done. Yeah, but I guess the sort of general arc that we follow of the characters is in Ben Stiller's words. We have innies and outies. So those outies are the ones outside of work, and innies the ones that are inside of work. So Ben Stiller says that Innie Marks, the main character's whole purpose is to sort of work out how to become a person and kind of gain identity. Yeah, we're going to delve into all of that, I guess. Just to
Yeah,
explore
yeah.
what it is, what it's all about memory and trauma,
Mm.
and identity and autonomy. I think is a pretty good way
Absolutely.
to summarize the
Yeah.
show.
Yeah, I think that's right. And on the one hand, it's a kind of dystopia of the corporate workplace, and on the
Yeah,
other hand, it goes far further than that in terms of the way in which it plays around with
yeah.
these ideas around self.
Someone saying
Mm.
it belongs in the genre of near future science fiction.
Hmm.
So this story is being a tool to sort of trigger this embedded dormant fear of like, is this what we're headed towards? And
Yeah,
it
yeah.
doesn't feel like Severance is exactly. It's not. It doesn't feel like something that's super far in the future. And it,
No.
I do think it reflects on a very hugely augmented scale what the kind of work environment is right now and the corporate
Mm.
lifestyle. I'd say,
That's right. They do all sorts of weird things with
yeah,
kind of the sort of retro-futurism elements of it. So like the
yeah,
computers all being like 1980s computers and things like
yeah.
that.
That's
So
true. That's
it's
true.
I think that helps make it feel kind of
Timeless a
timeless,
little
but
bit.
also
Yeah, where
yeah, yeah.
because I was going to say, where would
Um
you sort of put? Where would you set the? Because they all also use phone boxes. I guess no one really has a
yeah,
phone.
yeah, exactly. So there's yeah, interesting elements there where it's futuristic in terms of
Mm.
the technology that's been implanted in their brains and so on, but other things, even down to the we'll talk about the way in which there's a kind of corporate mythology like a religion almost,
Yeah.
and like a secular religion in the way that it portrays it.
Mm.
But the way in which they view all of that in their sort of hallowed spaces is all really kind of like clunky and old fashioned. It's all, moving waxworks and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, it's interesting for that. Shall we start with this thing about memory then? We've talked a little bit about memory
Mm.
before. We talked about it in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and we also talked about it a bit with the idea around Patrick Bateman's memory loss or hallucination and so on. So we've done a little
Mm.
bit on this, but this is something that, makes a very clear sort of statement about the idea of inserting a chip that separates out, well, sort of the sets two sets of brain waves, essentially, I think is the way in which it's portrayed. But I'm not going to say any more because I am not a sciencey person. You are my sciencey person. What did you think about the sort of science fiction
Yeah.
element of it?
So I thought it was interesting how the different versions of the character in their work and personal life are sort of split up and how their memories split up. Because initially I thought at the birth of your innie, let's say, you'd still be able to sort of remember all of their memories leading up to the point that the severance procedure happened, and sort of remember where they came from and who they are and who their family is, and then you'd sort of start having the separation of work and then personal life from that point. But in fact, the innie's whole episodic memory is completely erased. So, for example, we see interviews right at the beginning of this series of Helly, as she's being asked what her name is, what her mother's eye color is, where she was born. So this is kind of her highly personal, subjective, like autobiographical details have been like stripped away from her, and it leaves the innie in this point of existentialism and sort of loss of identity. But they keep obviously their semantic memory, which is just knowledge of facts that aren't tied to personal experience, such as naming any US state, what the capital of France is, for example. And they also keep their procedural memory, which is how to walk and talk. So yeah, it's with this kind of stripping away of their episodic memory, we're seeing how memory is linked to identity. And there's lots of studies in Alzheimer's and dementia patients who show how loss of this autobiographical memory can lead to identity breakdown and loss of sense of self. And I guess it all kind of links back to this corporate control, and this is a method of controlling the workers, how Lumen, the company in Severance, is controlling their workers and maintaining this kind of pretense and
but at the same time we're sort of presented with this idea that the appeal for the workers who've chosen to be severed lies in the fact that they will have 7 hours in every 24 that they won't remember the things that are happening in their lives outside,
where they're not
so for Mark for Mark it's the loss of his wife and the extreme trauma of his grief. And for Dylan, there's the feeling that he's actually unsuccessful in the rest of his life, but he seems to be quite successful within Lumen. And Irving, who is obviously terribly kind of lost and lonely, but has a real adherence to a real adherence to kind of the core values and so on, that he obviously finds that structure helpful to him. So these are our kind of, yes, in a way they're sort of different embodiments of kind of office personalities, but they're all leaving something behind in order to find this respite.
And I think that's with the whole trauma, the outies of each character have decided to undergo this procedure as a psychological compartmentalization. Bit of a mouthful there, but they're kind of avoiding the emotional pain that they're suffering by like splitting off from these traumatic memories that they've experienced. I was saying, I guess it kind of gives them hope to know that there's a version outside of themselves that isn't kind of weighed down by this grief, or just depression that each character's experiencing.
I think as a consequence, though, don't you think that we see Mark failing to work through his trauma because he just sort of
absolutely.
segregates it, and he, I guess, doesn't have a normal life like work and so on. We hear how he could no longer work as a lecturer in the place that he and Gemma had worked and so on. So he's made this choice as a sort of way of saving himself, but clearly has not succeeded in doing so.
Yeah.
But because of the separation of his selves, what did you think about? I mean, one of the things that really sort of like is at the heart of this, and particularly we see this in the culmination of the second season, is this idea that the innies and the outies of the same person view themselves, as it were, as two different people increasingly. So we have like Dylan, who his innie kisses his wife, but the
Yeah.
outie sees this as a form of cheating, for
Yeah,
example.
yeah. I mean, I guess it comes back to I definitely see, like, from the point of Severance and the sort of birth of the innie, and they definitely make that separation to say that the outies have lived for, whatever, 20, 30 years, however old the characters are, and then the innies are only as old as the point that the severance procedure was done. So there's a whole entire kind of conversation about infantilization there that we're going to get to, but you can see as the series progresses, the two personalities sort of divulge. So when Helly first sort of like spends time on the seventh floor, she's told that her outie has control over and has sort of, oh yeah, here we go. So it's shown to her that outies govern their existence, that the innie's existence is governed by that, by the outies, and how they almost act as their guardians. And it's sort of this question of identity and autonomy when sharing the same body. And I think that's what's really hard, because then there's also whole questions about consent when it comes to in season 2, Helly and Mark, Innie, Helly and Mark sort of fall in love and they sleep with each other, and it is then revealed that the person that Innie Mark slept with was actually outie Helena. So yeah, that was just, I feel like poor Mark S didn't get enough kind of, I don't know, I feel like he needed to catch a break, because Ellie was being so hard on him, being like, why are you acting different, when it's kind of like, in some ways, like, I don't know if rape is a strong enough word,
body swap dilemma, really. The blame put upon the person who didn't know that there was someone else in their body, which I suppose is sort of saying, well, you're basically asking somebody to break with all of their expectations about the person that they're seeing in front of them. So, but I mean, it is difficult, isn't it? Is it, could he consent in that environment?
But also, what does that mean if he couldn't tell apart, like, Helly from Helena, Innie Helly from outie Helena? Are they the same person? And this is something in that sort of Helly repeats to him in the final, being like, I am her.
There is something about that idea that that innies and the outies don't seem to be able to reconcile this idea that they are the same person, and yet unless we're saying that all we are is a product of our experiences, which rejects the idea of innate characteristics and so on, it also rejects the idea that any kind of, I suppose, the things that have affected and created the characters of the outies are immediately lost the moment they're severed. And that, I think, we find problematic as well, because it's like, when Mark says about sleeping, he says, you have to focus on the effects of sleep, and how even though you've not experienced actually sleeping, but it's sort of saying, well, surely even though his innie doesn't know what the trauma is that has affected him, we know all about the bodily effects of trauma and things like that. So it's hard to imagine that that's not somebody who is affected by the things that his outie has undergone, just because we've got a severance of the memories. But that's played around with a lot in the when Innie and outie Mark finally get to have their conversation, hopping in and outside of the birthing pod place. With a video camera.
Oh my god, that was actually brilliant. That would genuinely was brilliant. I don't know how they managed to put in so much, like, emotion, tension into Mark just having a conversation with himself, basically. It was very, very well done. But just going back a little bit with also free will, and like talking about how our experiences may influence our behaviors, it would be almost an interesting experiment in the real world, seeing how Severance, if you strip away all of these sort of perceived environmental influences based on memory, how your like genetics and biology. I don't know. I don't know how much Robert Sapolsky everyone knows,
exactly.
but his
like
arguments.
And I guess anybody who works with anyone who's suffered like life-altering amnesia, for example, and the way in which they are or aren't the person that they were before suffering that, presumably is the only way of looking at that sort of scientifically within the technology.
Not saying that I support Severance or anything, just to point out there.
I mean, I guess that the issue really is this idea that because the outie made the choice to undergo severance, they maintain the control within the relationship of the two halves. And when we see, Helly go to the extent of hanging herself in the lift, and even despite all of that, Helena sees this as sort of an external person trying to kill her rather than her own self saying this is wrong. Now Helena, obviously, we learn, is an Egan, the family who own and run this corporation, so she has a very particular I suppose agenda to prove that everything's okay with Severance, against her own self telling her in every way. I guess it's a real listen to what your body is telling you moment.
I just can't imagine having people talk about inner conflict, but there's literally another version of you that is like actively taking a stance against what you're trying to build and support.
One of the things that it made me think about as well was this idea around people who have a multiple personality disorder. And again, we're talking about rare things, played around with a lot in fiction, but obviously it does exist. And whether one personality is culpable for what another personality does, and the issues with that around whether these are a single person because of one body, or separate people because they don't necessarily know what the other is doing if other personalities manifest. So I think it does raise really interesting things. If an innie commits a crime, is the outie responsible for that, and so on. So very interesting. It takes us on to, I suppose, what the advantages are for a corporation to offer this kind of service to its workers, or encourage their workers to do something like this. We learn that this is obviously a controversial surgery, but it's also one that's being campaigned for, becoming increasingly widespread. We see the whatever he is, politician of whatever sort, whose wife goes through severance in order to give birth and then not remember any of the trauma of giving birth. So we can see that it has wider potential applications. What benefits does this have for a corporation, and where are the ethics around that?
Well, so I was going to say, linking to the birthing cabins and that woman going under procedure of severance to basically not remember giving birth, which is cited, not gone through it myself, but cited as one of a very, very painful, kind of traumatic experience. But I guess in terms of severance, just as a procedure, as like a potential therapeutic kind of solution, is exactly that. And I think, it's revealed to us, this is what's happening with Gemma, seeing whether they can sort of pick apart her memories and her personality and emotions. Not quite clear again how that all works and how that sort of creates different personalities for her, but again, seeing whether they can engineer a version of herself that's not affected by the traumas that she went through. So, and Lumen's kind of cited to be this medical company. So on one hand, it's kind of like that. On a corporate level, in terms of the workers, there's I think stated at the beginning of season 1 that Mark's got another severance procedure, and it's almost like a very severe version of like an NDA, like a non-disclosure agreement. anonymizing the work that they do, keeping it all under wraps, whatever's going on, whatever kind of
Absolutely.
work they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Of
Um,
course, that stands a little bit in contrast with the fact that even within the confines of the Severance floor, the innies have no idea what it is that
no
they
idea
do
what
with
they're
their work.
doing.
So there are
That's
multiple
true.
layers
That's true.
in terms of kind of acknowledging, I guess, that there is something ethically problematic going on here, that's
Exactly.
even the innies are not permitted to know what it is that they do, let alone
Yeah,
their
yeah. Well,
outies.
and I guess that's outie Mark doesn't know that. It's all these kind of
Mm.
things, like, you know, and it's also they're not allowed to take messages to the outside. This is
Yeah.
where the ethics of like actually just the work, like the work and slavery and all of this kind of
Mm.
stuff starts getting weird. As the innies may request to resign, but they can't take any sort of notes or communicate with their outies or share their desire with the person who basically
Mm.
has control over their existence and is their guardian and basically
Mm.
receives the fruits of the labor that the innies
Yeah.
carry out. That the outie is the person who receives the paycheck.
Mm.
And we realize as you watch the show that the innie's whole existence is just the office. They don't even get to experience, the respite of sleep.
Mm.
And this is
Seeing the
when you,
sky, they mention, things like that. They have
yeah, they can't
absolutely
even see
no
the sky.
environment. Yeah.
And then when it comes to control, they can't resist captivity as they can't
Mm.
imagine sort of alternatives
Mm.
to the reality that they live in. And they
Yeah.
lack any sort of meaningful like context to make decisions and assess their
Mm.
situation. And I think why for so long, before Helly even came along, Mark, Irving, and Dylan kind of just go about the status quo because that's just the reality that they live in,
Mm.
and they're very much like accepting of the lives that they live.
Yeah, their first, apart from the fact that Helly obviously kind of like raises certain issues with her reluctance to be
Mhm.
there, there is also the fact that Petey has left with no
Yeah,
explanation, and the idea that because they have no existence outside of this office, it's like a death, an
yeah,
unexpected death,
yeah,
and all the trauma that's associated. And they do have a sort of quasi funeral for him. Petey, we then learn, has in fact been unsevered unsuccessfully.
yeah. Reintegrated, yes.
Reintegrated, thank you. Yes. I mean the whole thing about Severance that I think is really interesting on this idea around kind of the way in which it forms a sort of idea around slavery is that not only do
Mm.
you have the innies enslaved, but the outies are effectively enslaved to the corporation as well, because as severed people, they are ostracized. They
Yes,
can't bring workplace
marginalized, yeah,
experience into a new job, a non-severed job, because they have
because
no
they don't
knowledge of
have
what it
any of
was
the
they did. So
experience.
it's essentially
Yeah,
like having a blank CV or whatever. And
yeah. Oh
so
my God, it's a
there's
pyramid scheme.
yeah, it's a kind of indentured slavery in a way. And I think we also hear that Mark lives in housing that is owned by Lumen as well.
Mm.
So there's a lot that is caught up in this idea that, it's, once you're part of it, there is no getting away from it. And that's, of course, what we learn when we discover that Irving is supposed to be killed once he's left
Yeah,
his job. The boss, what's her name, Miss Cabell, she is also at risk of being killed, and turn sort of renegade against the company and that sort of thing. So this real fear
yeah.
about the existence of severed people outside of the Lumen environment is very evident. The work that they do, as we said, is something that they don't understand at all. And I wondered, what did you think before we learn what it is they're doing, i.e., creating personalities for Gemma? What did you think they were doing?
I don't know. Macro data
Macro data
refinement
refinement. Yeah.
just sounds like corporate jargon. Like
Yeah.
maybe slightly out of context, but I do think increasingly the sort of language of the ruling class is becoming this
Mm-hmm.
like financial language, corporate jargon, sort of
Mm.
being able to speak in LinkedIn is becoming sort of, and I guess it also just reflects exactly in Severance. macro data refinement. I know what all of those like words mean separately, but like it put together, you're kind of thinking, what are they doing? Kind of,
Yeah. Yeah.
the works is mysterious and important is
Yeah.
something that keeps
Exactly.
getting
That's what we're
repeated.
told. And
Um,
the suggestions
yeah.
that they come up with. So Dylan is the one who thinks that the apocalypse has occurred and they're going to have to like humans are going to have to live in the sea, and that's what they're doing, preparing like the sea. And then
Preparing the sea.
Irving's like the other end of things. He thinks they're just removing swear words from movies. See, my initial thought was that this was not work at all, as in it was some sort of way of using them as kind of candidates in an experiment. So seeing how they responded to
Mhm.
numbers and perceiving numbers as scary and so on.
Okay, yeah, yeah,
But then,
yeah.
of course, we actually learned that the perceptions are those of Gemma's personalities rather than, I guess,
Yeah.
theirs. But it still doesn't really make any sense by the end. But the idea of sort of, looking at numbers and getting feelings about them is very
Yeah.
bullshitty kind of
Yeah.
stuff. So,
Yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah. I see feelings. The
uh,
numbers are scary.
yeah, exactly. But it does seem to cause a kind of trauma in them. So that in itself is
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
you're being put in front of the
Eliciting, yeah.
screen and you made to elicit fear from the work that you're doing, and that's how
Yeah,
you succeed.
yes.
Well, that's not
Yeah, it's
really great.
psychologically,
Yeah.
yeah, twisted.
Obviously, kind of like reflecting on sort of certain types of job that are very mundane and that sort of thing,
Hmm.
and yet within which a huge amount of emphasis is put on the importance of what they do for this whole kind of mysterious reasons. Um,
Mysterious and important.
exactly, mysterious and important. And this is where we get into the kind of like dystopia of the workplace, I guess. I mean, one of the things we
Hmm.
haven't really said is that it's very funny, not in a kind of like
Yeah,
laugh out loud way, but in a sort of like
a
absurdist
cynical
way.
kind of,
Yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Um,
Very much so. I do think someone actually kind of criticized the humor as it being kind of a bit like that Marvel humor was like, ooh, that just happened or whatever, or like making weird quips and stuff like that. But I didn't really mind it. I think it really needed that like level of absurdity. As
I mean, I was just going to say you were talking about kind of the unbelievability of a character like Milchick, but that he in a way is so he's the office manager and then he gets promoted to whatever's
floor
above that.
manager,
Yeah,
yeah.
and he is really funny in a sort of horrific, cringe-worthy sort of,
Mm,
playing out all of the horrible stereotypes. And okay, yes, they're absurd in their way of presenting it, but there are so many things. Even though I've not worked very much in kind of an office corporate environment, not since I was in my late teens, I guess, but even in working in education and things like that, the same sort of rubbish, occurs in terms of the perks, and they are so ridiculous. I think we're told that the perks have, got really extreme. They used to be just like a handshake and a refill of the creamer, and like just the idea that to have white coffee, you had to like fulfill your remit.
yeah, yeah.
But then they become finger traps. What is a finger trap? Do you know what a finger trap is?
I don't understand. This is the first time I'm even hearing of a finger trap. What is a finger
I
trap?
don't know. I don't know. They get finger traps, they get erasers, but they don't use pencils. So erasers are like just it's like it's this goes back to the
Also,
infantilizing thing. Did you like ever collect rubbers when you were like sort of like 6 or
yeah,
something? Like
I guess I did, to
yeah,
be fair.
yeah,
Yeah. No, also, where are they? What is O&D? The sort of like I guess, what does O&D stand for? Something in design.
optics and
Optics.
design. Yeah.
Optics and design make tote bags. Sorry, where are they
Yeah.
taking these tote bags? Like, I'm
Well,
sure,
the
that.
tote bags are for the handbooks to go in, but they don't take anything out of the office.
Oh,
So, and they're not even
it's
allowed
like
to wander very
literally.
far in the corridor. So it's completely
No, it's like, where are
pointless.
you?
Yeah,
Where's it all going? Where's it all
yeah,
going? Shall we talk a little bit about the sort of whole infantilization, like that kind of
yeah,
aspect of control,
yeah.
the way that they. Yeah, I mean, going back to the sort of how productivity is incentivized, these
Mm.
kind of silly little, I guess, like trivial perks, and the whole like damn, and going back to sort of the humor of the show, seeing something as jarring as a dance experience.
Music dance experience.
Yeah, music dance
Yeah,
experience, or melon bars, or waffle
yeah.
parties. You know,
And I mean, I was just going to say the infantilizing thing, but I guess it's that against the mundanity of the office environment, and also within a context where everything is controlled by Lumen and what they permit on the Severance floor. So I guess that within that context, it might be quite nice to stop and dance for a
yeah,
bit or whatever. But of course, it's
yeah,
absolutely meaningless within the context of actual life and what
yeah,
is
and also just how
enjoyable.
the sort of like experiences that you should be entitled to as a
Mm,
human being is like
yeah,
you haven't listened to music or ever danced before
yeah,
is yeah, I
yeah.
it's just obviously shocking and a bit like, okay, these people are literally have been brought up in a little shelter, a little prison of their own,
Mm,
and you know, there's so many comparisons that are made about the seventh floor, like comparing it to hell,
mm, mm.
and yeah, and sort of you know, Halle always talks about it being its own sort of imprisonment.
Miss Cabell refers to it. There's this weird thing I haven't quite got my head around, but when she's obviously, so she's unsevered, but when she's working within the severed floor, she makes
Mhm.
this point about her mother being an atheist and basically saying that um, the idea of hell being created not by God but by people is like so much kind of worse and more realistic because of the things that people are able to come up with. And then you like looking around and seeing, melon parties and so on instead
Yeah,
of actual kind of workplace reform.
yeah,
The use of the animations as well really struck me as you were talking about kind of like infantilization. When Helly finishes her like first project and they get a little animated screen with
yeah.
Kia flying like a superhero on this like thing that looks like a video game from like the 1980s.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I love again just going back to the aesthetics of the show, just so good. I wish I could tell more about it. There's all sorts of videos that we will maybe link in
Yeah.
the description to just talk about like the graphic design
Mm.
of and why Severance looks so good. I just think Ben Stiller was amazing. I don't know if you remember the in the first episode of season 2, that opening where Mark's like running through the corridors trying to find Gemma. The way that they filmed that whole sequence used this kind of big ginormous robotic arm that would swing around Mark's actor to sort of like yeah, kind of almost feel like you're following him in a little like video game of him running down corridors, but it's really
Yeah.
really good. Again, I recommend some of the like breakdown videos of just the aesthetics of
That
Severance.
sounds really
Just
interesting. I
so
mean,
well done.
I read a good article that was comparing it to ideas around kind of like escape rooms and the feeling of being trapped and
Yes.
how you can mimic that so that people feel like they are themselves caught within it. And I have to say, the idea of all of those blank corridors with no way out, even though
Yeah.
it's all very
It's
open and
so
things like that,
liminal. It's
it's
so
like
liminal.
yeah, and it's very claustrophobic in its sort of nature as well. I think this
Mhm.
idea of, the constant not being able to get out thing that occurs. People are trying to they find an exit, but it's not a real exit, and so on. While we're talking about kind of rewards, one of the things that I thought was one of the greatest moments in the show is definitely the season 2 finale and the choreography and merriment
Oh
finale
my God.
scene when they
Imagine
finish the
a
cold
whole
harbor for her.
department.
Yeah.
Your whole existence, your Innie's whole existence is just band practice every day, like
Yeah.
of just like consistently their whole entire life. Also, and to go back to Milchek and like Miss Cabell, all the things that Milchek has to do, and then he has to just go home and like deal with the memories of all of that. To be honest, I think if I were him,
Yeah.
I'd want to get
But
severed.
isn't
It's
he
just crazy.
basically the same outside as well? Because and there are weird things like when they're trying to convince somebody to do something, they basically turn up with like a pineapple and some other like fruit in a
Yeah.
basket.
What's
So
pineapple? Is that symbolic or something? I don't
I
know.
don't know, but it's just like it's that whole kind of thing of sort of, almost like believing that the absurd
Yeah.
kind of worker mentality applies to outies as well. And I have to say, the
Yeah.
world outside Lumen is also has kind of like some fairly uncomfortable elements, and we don't see a great deal of it. But where we do see it, it's things like the brother-in-law, Mark's brother-in-law, Rickon,
Mhm.
and his sort of career as a self-help guru and so on. And it's
Yes,
so
yeah.
awful, it's such a load of rubbish.
It's so
Um,
funny. Like
yeah,
the writers must have had a field day, like
yeah,
writing that sequence where, especially where all the innies had
yeah,
discovered
yeah,
Rickon's book. And
yeah.
again, they have no concept. There's no concept of the outside world, or like it's a foreign idea to
Mm,
them to even rebel against the corporation, or
mm,
that could be a bad thing. And
mm.
um, and was it oh God, what was the quote? It was something about like in the middle of uh industry is dust or something like that. I can't
Yeah, there's
remember.
all of
Or
those stupid things that they sort of like say that these are sort of like these
they can't crucify
well-being
you if your
books.
hand is in a fist or something like that.
Exactly, a lot of that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah. It's just so good.
yeah, and the very fact that Rickon is busy agreeing to rewrite his book so that it could be used by innies, and yet he's saying like almost exactly the opposite of what his Dev and his wife
Yes,
is like, but that's the opposite of what you wrote in your book. And it's just like, it's because none of it means anything. It's just
it means anything.
um
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
yeah.
also just to go back as well to how the outies that are present around the severed floor, such as Miss Cobell and Miss Milchek and Miss Huang as well.
Mm,
Um, they've been like raised. It's revealed to us that this sort of state-sponsored
mm,
indoctrination that they've been
yeah.
raised from children to sort of
Mm,
work for Lumen.
yeah.
Um, and with the whole, I think episode 8, where we sort of spend a whole 40 minutes with Miss Cabell, and we realized that she's sort of been raised from a child, and she actually invented the severance
Mm.
procedure. What did you think of that reveal in terms of her being
Yeah.
the creator of Severance? It also makes sense, like all in season 1, her being like, no, reintegration is possible, reintegration is
Mm,
possible.
yeah.
Then having her being shut down by the board.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it raised a couple of things. One was the inclusion of this idea of corporate theft, the idea that actually a lot of people at the head of corporations haven't
Mm.
necessarily invented anything themselves, and also the idea
Yeah.
that they couldn't function without their workers. So there's something there. There's also something about the indoctrination process and how it functions on people who haven't been severed as well. So, she comes from a household where she was
Mm.
exposed to people who were, absolutely indoctrinated into this Scientology kind of like
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
mindset. And she sees herself as inferior, or has been like learned to sort of think of herself as inferior to the Egans, even though she is evidently a driving force behind this major thing that they have
Mm.
developed.
And also, just I think the there's the sort of phenomenon of like women's inventions and ideas sort
Mm,
of being stolen
yeah,
from them as well. I think it's important that
absolutely. Yeah,
it's
yeah.
she is a woman who discovered this big
Mm,
procedure that was taken away from, like, and she
mm,
never, you know no credit was given to her.
mm.
And even her care, or is it, who do we meet in the episode? Is it her aunt or her
I think it's her
carer
aunt. Her
or
aunt.
her
That's right.
mother?
Yes.
Her
So I think
aunt
her aunt
trying to
who.
destroy the evidence. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
Yes. Because she doesn't want to credit uh yeah, Miss Cabell. On the other hand, of course, Miss Cabell is, the most sinister kind of boss. She's has the ability to kind of spy on and manipulate outie Mark by being his neighbor.
Yes.
And
Oh my God.
that whole idea, I guess, about corporations trying to control what people do outside of
Yeah.
the
This
workplace
It's just
is,
like a textbook case of like coercive control. I think
yeah,
that like the
yeah.
surveillance and monitoring. Yeah, exactly. Even
Mm,
outside
mm,
of the workplace.
mm. And it does
Yeah.
make me think
Yeah.
of stuff like, really extreme sort of social media policies,
Hmm.
or uh, people sort of saying that their employees cannot do certain things in their private lives because it's, bad for the corporation's image or whatever, and I think that the more a corporation has a sense of its own sort of self-importance, the more it feels threatened by anybody doing things that don't, necessarily fit with that image.
Yeah.
And so that's really creepy. But it also made me think about the kind of the permanent inequality, because as a within the workplace hierarchy, because as a severed person, you could never become Mr. Milchek or Ms. Cobell, because by their very nature, those jobs have to be done by people who have not been severed. So there's always a roof to where you could be promoted to. There's always a fundamental inequality.
There's also the question of, workplace injustices or workplace problems. Like if you're getting abused or bullied at work, or just like, all sorts of things that could happen with, your superiors, coercive behavior. Like you can't control the fact that your outie goes into work every day. You also can't communicate that. Or even put that, the whole entire process of innies requesting, putting out a resignation request. Lumen controls that whole exchange, what the innie and outie get to see between one another.
Yeah, I mean, if we're thinking about this in terms of sort of metaphor for kind of exploitative forms of employment as well, the idea that there is whatever injustices happen within a workplace, even without a process like severance, so even in the real world, if you are essentially reliant on your employer, not only for obviously your income, but also your ability to get another job. So the idea that, if you get a bad reference from one place, then, it's going to be hard to get a job somewhere else. The idea that, you put yourself at risk if you try to expose injustice, whistleblowers and things like that. So there is there's a lot of parallels there. And of course, one of the things that we see is that there are these the break room in season 1 is basically a torture chamber where people are made to apologize for things that they haven't actually done wrong but are perceived to be against kind of the company's policies,
like psychological torture as well. This is it feels like it's restructuring their whole perceptions of themselves.
And I suppose the opposite to that is like the well-being sort of stuff. I mean, like melon parties, but also the well-being sessions with Miss Casey and so on. And the stuff they put in place for well-being. Like when Helly attempts suicide, their response is like, we've locked away the extension cables. That is the issue. Your access to things with which to kill yourself, not the reasons why you were trying to kill yourself.
Exactly.
What did you think of the presentation of the well-being sessions where she was like reading out, your outie is very good at lovemaking?
Every fact equally. I mean, I do think Miss Casey, Gemma, Miss Casey is a weird character. She seems a bit kind of lost to the fairies the whole time in the series. And I guess my question is was Miss Casey coming to before sort of she was removed from the 7th floor and we discovered that she's being tortured in the sort of floor below, the sort of floor below the 7th floor where she was residing every day when she was coming in and out of work as well. I don't know. I guess,
I mean, they're putting her obviously into these different rooms to become different personalities. And I suppose that what we're kind of gathering is that by creating these different versions of her, each one in a way has been sort of stripped down to exactly what they want it to be in certain circumstances. So the version that is Miss Casey has certain qualities, and perhaps that sort of explains the kind of shallowness of her persona, that she's basically been reduced to the person who could be the well-being manager. I don't know.
Very effective as a well-being manager if you seem a bit sort of detached and unfeeling. I mean,
I think that the whole word well-being and the well-being industry is like, it's so easily satirized now. I know. There are lots of things in this that are horribly like familiar, like the team building game where they're like throwing the ball to each other. the group photo. When they meet Bert and Felicia in the corridor and they say they're just back from doing the egg drop challenge. Did you ever have to do the egg drop challenge? Did you do it at school or anything?
I'm sorry, what's the egg drop challenge?
The egg drop challenge is basically,
it's
a team building exercise where people are put into groups, they're given an egg, and using just like paper and sellotape, they have to find the best way of stopping their egg from smashing if it's dropped off a roof. It's a classic, you know, and I've had to do it in various scenarios. Not, I have to say work, more like stuff when I was like younger, like volunteering training and things like that, rather than any workplace stuff. But workplace, to be fair, just the same kind of stuff, which is sometimes like, you know, all well and good, except for the fact that when it's like we've done this team building thing, so we won't look at any of the actual things that are a problem, or when they're talking about like the different kind of like tempers in the human personality, that's obviously like core to what like the kind of Keir pathway is supposed to say. And it just reminds me of like all the bollocks like Myers-Briggs and all of the kind of like all of that sort of stuff. And there's loads of different ones. And I had to do one in the workplace that sounded extremely similar. It wasn't exactly the same words, but it was like the different ancient humours or whatever, and you were divided into like groups based on this. And at the same time, it's like but you know, we're thinking of taking away biscuits in the staff room and removing your access to newspapers because these, and we're not going to pay for the Christmas drinks anymore. And you're just like, what? You know, the stuff that's like, you know, the stuff that is so small. It's like it's your finger trap. It's
just what actually like ends up building relationships with people. People who meet up in the break room for a cup of tea or you know, after work drinks or whatnot. You know.
The beginning of season 2 is really good for looking at this as well, because obviously there's at the end of season 1 they've managed to get their innies, their moments in the outie world, and then this like rebellion is viewed as a learning opportunity within the workplace, and they've been turned they've been turned into an animated film.
Oh god, so uncomfortable.
Exactly. One of the things we haven't talked about, we're talking about like ways of kind of like joining people together, but one of the company's strategies also seems to be to force extreme levels of competitiveness and not joining up with other departments. And I wonder what you thought about that kind of propaganda that has filtered in and meant that there's no interdepartmental fraternization.
Yeah, I mean, again, isolation is kind of part of coercive control. In terms of limiting the like life experience of the innies as much as possible, again, kind of going back to them not being able to resist captivity because they don't have any alternative sort of idea of their existence or any, you know, limiting their context. It's like, you know, if you don't allow these departments to interact, they can't exchange information, they can't, and we kind of see this is how the mini revolution against Lumen forms as you know, MDR, the MDR department slowly kind of reaches out and expands, and they discover O&D, and then they discover the goat people. I still don't understand what the goats are for. Why are we killing goats? What's going on? The whole entire conversation. How they? For a minute I thought that they were putting Gemma's personalities into the goat. Not sure. Not sure.
Yeah, I mean, it fits with the whole absurdist thing. It gives us an amazing Gwendolyn Christie moment. Very excellent.
Yes, she's iconic.
Yes, but yeah, I mean, I think it fits in with this idea somehow that there's kind of like this cult element behind it, and the mythology has been sort of like expanded into kind of ritualistic behavior.
Yeah, also just this surreal quality of being in this sterile environment, office environment, and then just suddenly being like, oh, there's a big room with a hill and goats and lots of people tending to the goats, and what's going on and what's happening.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and the moment at the end where it's like, Emil thanks you. Emil is the name of the goat. And it's just like, oh, Emil. I'm so happy for Emil. But yeah, you know, it's I guess it adds to that sense of like unexpected threat as well, doesn't it? When they all emerge over the hills with their pitchforks and so on. but then the like mythology that's been created because of the kind of lack of context that the innies have, this whole idea that like the goat people and optics and design all believe this myth that the people in MDR have
Yes.
pouches and they have to
Yeah.
show
Well, this
their
is all this
bellies
sort
to
of
them.
propaganda as well.
Yeah.
It's just,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, again, just forms of control. I mean, do we want to talk a bit about as well, kind of like how Lumen becomes a bit of a secular religion and how the sort of like
Yeah,
propaganda and how the
absolutely.
role of O&D and the art that they make. I feel the murals and the huge sort of art tapestries that they make throughout the show are great. Just really interesting. Yeah, I think there's. I also love Irving's role, and then just like in sort of in his interest in O&D and Bert, and then talking about the art that is being displayed in Lumen, and then it makes sense how Irving's then an artist outside of his. I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah, it kind of
absolutely.
and
Yeah.
his hobbies and his interests transcend Severance. There, I think is a good
Absolutely. And
example.
he seems to have, something seems to be seeping, almost like there's a something is
Mm.
breaking down for him, doesn't it? Where he's sort of seeing the encroaching paint when he falls asleep in dreams
Mm-hmm.
at work and so on. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that really struck me, apart from the sort of use of all this very bad art within kind of like the corporate environment,
Mm.
but yeah, the sort of the propaganda elements of it, and particularly the accidental by Milchek printout of the painting is entitled The Grim Barbarity of Optics and Design. And then when they go to ask about it, and Bert's like, no, we don't have a painting like that. And he's like, no, that painting is the microdata refinement calamity. And it's basically the same
The
version,
same
same
picture,
painting, but it's
yeah,
like, who was eating whom in this terrible
yeah.
thing that happened in the past. Again, it's sort of absurd, but it's also like just a manifestation of this idea that, people, if workers work together, then they can manifest real change within their
Mm-hmm.
working environments and so keep them threatened by each other. There are things about Bert that are
Mm-hmm.
not all that they seem.
Yeah, well, I guess it kind of comes on to the whole secular religion as, Luhmann's ideologies, I guess, communicated in, I guess, the versions of like sacred texts and
Mm,
rituals created around the regime. So the handbook, I guess, is their kind of Bible or, or
mm,
Torah or whatever like version of
mm,
sacred book you want to talk about. But yeah, we sort of discover how Luhmann's rewriting and reinterpreting history to,
mm.
shape the collective memory. Well, there is no memory. I guess that's the
Memory,
whole
exactly.
point.
So invent one, yeah, exactly.
But even we discover, and this it took me a little sec to really get this, but when Irving and Bert are having dinner with Bert's partner,
Mm-hmm.
it's revealed to us that the severance procedure has actually been around for 20 rather than
Mm-hmm.
13 years as
Yeah.
Irving had thought. And I want to know Bert's wider role. I think it still left me with a bit of confusion what
Yeah, as
he
far as I
actually
could tell, he
did.
was like a fixer who
Like a bit
dealt
of a
with,
goon? Was he just like carrying
yeah, I
out with,
mean,
the like Lumen's dirty work?
I think that's exactly right. And obviously, again, this thing about love, which is really interesting, this idea that Irving and Bert are busy falling in love. Irving discovers that Bert has a husband,
Hmm.
and then the relationship that clearly still has potential between the two of them. There is still that.
Hmm.
So again, it sort of eradicating that idea that the innies are completely different from their outies. The
Yeah.
Irving and Bert still have that connection where they have a ham and they,
Yeah. Yeah.
and yet there's also the element that obviously Bert seems to be intending to deal with Irving and instead allows him to go into exile with his dog.
Yeah.
Um, it's terribly sad. I mean, it's
It is. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. I think on the other side of that, talking about love, we have. I read a quote somewhere that Severance is the only show where they can have a man be monogamous with two women and
yeah,
not be considered cheating.
yeah.
Because we explore the whole, Outie Mark's feeling for Gemma, his wife, and then Innie Mark's feeling is for Helly R, or like, Helena Egan, as her Outie is called. Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about the sort of finale in a little bit, but
Mm.
What did you hear about? What did you think about the whole Egan family and how they're sort of, put on a pedestal, and the
Mm.
cult of personality aspect of how Kate Egan is framed, for the workers as this almost like godlike, infallible figure.
Mm.
What did you think of that?
Yeah, it's not in a way enormously removed from the kinds of cults of personality that have emerged around people like Donald Trump and people like Elon Musk. So like
Yeah, yeah.
there's something there about people believing in a kind of character, describing certain things to that
Mm-hmm.
character, and therefore creating a mythology around it that allows these people to have far more significance than is perhaps their due. But there's obviously also something there that, yes, builds on aspects of, as we said, things like Scientology and Mormonism and so on that have been grabbed at. It also made me think a little bit about the idea around family as it's presented in
Yes.
Succession, and looking at like the sort
Okay.
of
Yeah.
like the Murdochs as a sort of dysfunctional family, but with that sense that Succession kind of deals with, which is all about the I guess the right of children to inherit the business from their father, even if they don't
Mm-hmm.
have any of the skills or experience, whatever that he had, but just this idea of kind of like
Mm-hmm.
uh, keeping it in the family, and that family matters in this way. And I think that you see it with things like when Helena Egan is eating an egg, and it's obviously like paralleling the fact that Kier's favorite breakfast was three raw eggs in a glass of milk, and she's like,
Uh,
and her father's like, oh, you should be having them raw, and she's like, it's bad enough having to
so,
eat this egg at all, drink my
yeah,
milk.
yeah, actually.
Clearly there's a whole weight of expectation on Helena, which means that even when she nearly dies, she's still maintaining the myth, and that whole exhibition that Helly wakes up in, that is like this complete
Mm-hmm.
false mythology around her Innie's life, is really manipulative of both
Mm-hmm.
Outie and Innie in many ways. So
Yeah,
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 I don't know. I
definitely.
guess that anything where you get a kind of like cult of personality around an individual, that
Mm-hmm.
individual is eventually going to die. So you're going to pass it down through the family line to maintain it, increase the mythology. And the whole, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, again, it's one of those bits that's really funny where, they go on their outdoor retreat to find read the missing book of
Yeah,
Kier's
some more team
life
building.
work. Exactly. And it actually turns out that it's all about his brother, who may or may not have existed, masturbating
Yeah.
in the forest. And it's just like, and it's
Just
given
so
this like
confusing.
huge significance. Um,
I just I apparently I read somewhere that the brother is meant to be sort of Kier's other half, in the way that the
yeah,
outies and the innies
yeah,
are. It seems to be
yeah.
that kind of comparison there. But again, I'm still even a bit confused about the whole moral of that story. Just,
I know.
don't have a
And I
wank
think
in the
in many
woods.
ways, I'm
I'm
not sure
confused.
I'm not sure that there is like, any real depth to it. It's almost like kind of like religious fundamentalism of like any text that is
Yeah.
produced by, or seems to fit within this canon of this alleged prophet must be taken
Mhm.
absolutely literally as having this extreme depth to it.
Yeah, yeah, it's
So
very into it. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it does also, that whole thing does raise all kinds of issues around death, and death is obviously a big theme because what is death? They find that dead animal, and they're like, is this what something a dead thing is like? Because obviously, the death for an innie is
Yeah.
not the same kind of death that, like,
Yeah, and they were like, I guess this is what a dead animal looks like. This
yeah,
is what.
exactly,
Yeah, that's so
So
true. Yeah, I didn't even consider.
yeah, coming back to that idea, like, is it killing the innies if Lumen shuts down? Which is obviously what the innies
Hmm.
believe, but what the outies deny. And Helena Egan doesn't believe that the innies are people. She's the person, she says, and Helly is not.
Yeah, for her, it's just, Severance is just a tool. But what did you think about the whole conversation that like Mark and Outie Mark had over the phone, and how that went down? And I guess also just maybe we should talk about the finale, and how
Yeah.
after agreeing to help the decisions that Mark sort of made. How did you feel about that all unraveling?
There is no way of reconciling like the situation, even if the kind of reversal of the severance process works. It was outie Mark started doing it without the consent of innie Mark. So even if they are in some way amalgamated, there is still that question of the kind of eradication of one by the other, especially as you were saying about like the difference in the length of their lives and the extent of their experiences.
Yeah. So we see with PT how the reintegration of his memories is starting to sort of block up in random, in the chronology of his life. The things that he experienced at work are inserting in themselves into parts of his life as a child or whatever, just in terms of how it just fits in. It's just very clever.
And it also, because of the sheer limitation of life within Lumen on the Severance floor, that's surely going to contribute very little to the overall kind of personal experience of an amalgamated person, right? Basically they go in, they do this sort of data collecting. Yes, we can see the friendships that form and things like that, but they're still consigned to this very small context and so on, which might mean that they are by nature eradicated, the way that you hold on to memories that are sort of more significant to you. So would the innies by just be kind of like eroded essentially by the greater personality of the outie?
Yeah, very true.
I don't know, but I did feel that there was a real, I guess we might have felt that given what had been done to Gemma and given the sort of, I guess, moral significance placed on rescuing her and reuniting her with her husband, that could have been seen as the ultimate sort of, if you're balancing out the kind of like, what's the morally correct outcome, then it might be the one where, Gemma is saved and her life with outie Mark resumes. Instead of which we're given on this occasion, she is saved, but not at the cost of innie Mark. And I thought that he chooses Helly, even though I don't think that we're led to believe that their relationship could exist outside of the Severance floor.
Well, see, this is as clever as I am, I think I've in my notes I've written the solution to the whole cliffhanger is
good.
Is we should establish like this. If I was in the Severance world, I would establish a severed coffee shop chain where sort of like displaced employees who have undergone the severance procedure, who are like struggling to get a job after termination, blah 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 blah, can like come and work, and their innies get to work in a normal sort of unfiltered work environment, and even like have some post-work hangouts, venturing out into the outside world, and then they can sort of return to the outies lifestyle. Obviously, that'd be like a temporary solution because I think innies deserve equal treatment and equal work-life balance as well. But I feel like Mark had an easy in there, being like, you can work, you can exist, but just outside of Lumen, isn't that what everyone wants? I feel because I guess I feel like outie Mark could have done a better job finding a sort of common in between for him and innie Mark, but it is what it is. But I think it was shocking to me how many people after innie Mark kind of decided to choose himself. Like he'd accomplished everything outie Mark had sort of asked of him, going on doing some corporate espionage and sort of going undercover and rescuing Gemma and
even accidentally killing the big guy with the beard.
Accidentally killing the big guy with the beard. So overall, pretty good job. And again, also the implication of like who's responsible for the murder in your outie. I guess it's outie Mark because that's the person who killed him. Anyways, I think after all of that, people being shocked that then innie Mark chose Helly, the person that he's in love with, and the whole setup was done so that outie Mark was destined was kind of created to have no feelings for Gemma, and maybe that was also set up by Lumen to make sure that whatever plan they had
Yeah.
might be hindered or fail, and all of that. But I'm so shocked at how many people were so angry at Mark for actually showing autonomy and becoming his own person and making
That's really
decisions for
interesting.
himself.
Well, that goes back to what you were
Because
saying about kind of like marginalized people being
yes, yeah,
fine until they use their
it's
voices,
easy.
and
Yeah,
yeah.
it's easy to sympathize with the with sort of marginalized, oppressed groups of people until they become a sort of nuisance to you or your
Mm,
cause or what your stance is. As soon as
mm,
it opposes what you we perceive as right, is
yeah.
yeah, it was beautiful. And then as they were rolling the credits with a bit of Windmills of Your Mind playing,
It was so
God,
good. The running down
beautifully
those,
done.
yeah, white corridors, and
Yeah,
yeah, with that, yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
absolutely. Um, which is why I know there's going to be a third season, but I did think it made
Hmm.
a very fitting ending in a way. It didn't answer all the questions, but that's fine because I don't think they ever can necessarily.
Yeah, yeah.
But it did, yeah, it did kind of give a sense of confirmation to the personhood of
Yeah.
the Innies. Um, but I guess one of the issues that is, if we're thinking about ways of resolving it, it does come down to this idea of kind of the proprietary technology
Hmm.
and the idea that Lumen, as things stand, seem to be the only company who are able to provide access to the innie self, essentially, by having those transition points, like the elevator, like the door to the birthing lodge, that are places where you can make the switch. And so I
Hmm.
guess as long as Lumen is the only company that can do that, then we
Hmm.
have a real problem with the idea of separating the life of the innies from being trapped under
Yeah,
Lumen.
yeah.
Um,
Unless if there's sort of full repossession of the technology and stuff.
mm,
Because yeah, I mean, with Gemma having hopefully escaped, I guess the one thing I can sympathize with, well, obviously I sympathize with Gemma. God, she's been through it, but in that situation where Mark leaves her at the stairwell, I think it was very easy for him to be like, by the way, I'm Innie Mark. I need to go deal with some stuff and help my friends, but I will be back for you. Alti Mark will be back for you. I think could have been a very plausible explanation in that
yeah,
very moment. Oh
yeah.
God, bless Gemma. Just seeing the love of your life after going through all of that, just run away to another woman must have been tough.
In many ways, I think that any relationship that Outie, Mark, and Gemma now have is going to be dramatically changed by what they've respectively been
Oh
through. I mean, Mark has
yeah.
had this incredibly traumatic process of grief. Gemma has whatever she has experienced. It's sort of
Plus, just
unclear.
watching her
Yeah,
husband run away
exactly.
with another
Yeah.
woman. Oh,
Plus the fact
oof.
that as obviously the test was, would she remember her trauma when faced with the triggering it's just awful, the idea of putting the triggers around her and then seeing whether she reacts to them.
Yeah,
But the moment she's out of that building, presumably that trauma of a miscarriage and strain that it was putting on her relationship
yeah,
and all of those sorts of things, that's all still there. She hasn't had the
yeah.
time to process them, I assume, because she's been busy
Being
being chucked in
tortured.
and out of different personality
Yeah.
rooms. Yeah.
Oh,
So in
oh.
many ways, I think, I'd love to be optimistic about it, but I think they're probably a bit doomed anyway.
Yeah.
So maybe it is time to give Innie
Everyone's gonna
Mark
be unhappy.
Innie
Yeah.
Mark at
Give
least can
any
have a
marks.
chance. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe he does have a chance. Oh.
What a show.
So what do you think your takeaway is from all of that?
That probably we shouldn't allow corporations to insert chips into the heads of their employees.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
I
that's a pretty good
think
takeaway.
yeah, yeah. Um, yeah. So that I think is one major thing. And also I guess the idea that employees are people as a sort of metaphor
Yeah.
for the whole thing.
Basically, everyone needs to unionize. So
Yeah, absolutely. And
solidarity.
yeah, and also I guess stand up to the kind of like when you see perceived injustices, don't be kind of allow yourself to be made to feel better through The small changes. It's very easy to accept what seems to be improvements, which are actually completely superficial and don't deal with underlying issues. And that's obviously played out in an extreme here. Do not accept a melon party as a substitute for actual work change.
And never accept the pineapple as an outside of work.
That's right. Absolutely. So, anything else that you took away from it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess with memory and identity and Lumen's whole idea of the work-life balance, by stripping away the Innie's memory, Lumen has eliminated any chance for, that exact work-life balance that they so preach, which I think is overall the whole irony of the show.
Yeah. Oh, we did it. I have to say, I was a bit worried about this one when I was sitting down to do the notes.
Really?
Well, just like, there's so much and I don't understand.
There is quite a lot. I definitely found it a bit like, how do I encapsulate all of my thoughts and feelings? And just like, there's so much. I think we did a good job of breaking that apart and sort of developing on each point quite well. Because I was like, there is so much to mention.
There really is.
But yeah.
So, yeah, listeners, if you have the answers to our conundrums, then please
share your theories.
Let us know. Want to know. In the meantime, we will be back because of Easter. We'll have 3 weeks between episodes this time. So wait with bated breath for what is probably going to be an episode on Flow, Oscar-winning animation, but we will be confirming that once we've sorted out all of our Easter arrangements and Masha is not in Japan and all of that sort of thing. So that will be something to look for. In the meantime, you can follow us on Instagram at Dystopian Fiction Current Affairs. You can check out our website, which is dystopian fiction has been moved to currentaffairs.com. And you can subscribe to our Substack and you can give us donations so that we can continue to host all of this. And you can, most importantly, let us know what you think and what you'd like to see next. And thank you. We always enjoy having recommendations and ideas coming in.
Thank you very much.